Hello all. Sri Lanka's economic crisis. It is very much in news. Why it is in the news I am going to discuss in this particular session. So, economic crisis in Sri Lanka. I am going to explain what are the reasons behind its economic crisis. First, historically, it is a colony of British. Same like India, it got exploited by British. Sri Lanka also got exploited by the British. Obviously, it will be in a developing nation mode. So, number one, product of the historical imbalances in the economic structure. History means because of a colony. Number two, IMF's loan related conditionality. What happened? The Sri Lanka was in a position of collapse, bankrupt. So, it went for International Monetary Fund in order to get some loans. Then International Monetary Fund had told that, yes, I will give you loan, but your physical deficit is 5%. What is physical deficit? Physical deficit means the amount of money the governments or the countries should borrow from external countries or external organization for the sake of survival of the country. So, 5% of physical deficit means 5% of GDP they need to borrow from foreign countries or foreign institutions for its survival. So, the IMF had told that no, you cannot go for foreign borrowings. You have to reduce your physical deficit from 5% to 3.5%. Then only I will give you loan. Then again they got struck down. What I have to do? But there is no other opportunity. They have to get the loan from the International Monetary Fund. So, they accepted the conditionality which is given by International Monetary Fund. There is a Bretton Woods conference twins which is called as Bretton Woods twins. It is called as World Bank and other is called as International Monetary Fund. They will give loans to developing countries or the countries which are suffering with balance of payment, by fixing some conditionality. In the same way, International Monetary Fund also had created a condition for Sri Lanka. I will give you loan, but you have to reduce your physical deficit. Conditionality, so they cannot borrow from other countries. So, they were being pushed into debt ridden. They were pushed into no more opportunity to come out of the suffering. Number two. Third reason, misguided policies of authoritarian regime and the official embrace of pseudoscience, fake science, claim that we are doing scientifically. What is that? Authoritarian policy. One beautiful policy which was been failed like anything is complete organic farming. Total ban on synthetic fertilization. That is one of the policy which created a dampened impact on economic situation of Sri Lanka. So, this is the major three reasons. These are the current Sri Lankan economic crisis is because of these three major reasons. But I will explain more. Sri Lanka, what happens, the Sri Lanka usually they will get a foreign resource, a very good foreign resource because of exports. But export of what? They are good in export of tea. They are good in export of rubber. But what happened in 2008 financial crisis, 2003 the sudden downturn in the international market, global market, they are not in a position. The rates were being fallen down. The rates were being fallen down and the Sri Lankan goods of tea and rubber also fallen down. So, when they sell in the foreign market, their prices came down. So, they are not getting sufficient amount. They are not getting sufficient foreign reserves. That is one reason. So, Sri Lanka mobilizes foreign exchange reserves through primary commodity exports like tea and rubber. This is one reason. So, they produce tea and rubber, they will be selling out through exports and they will be getting the foreign reserves. But what happened? 2008 financial crisis, 2013 sudden economic downturn and 2019-2020 COVID. These are the reasons because of which the demand reduced. The international price has fallen down with respect to tea and rubber. So, they don't have the market outside. So, they are not getting good prices. Number one. Number two, tourism sector is a very good revenue generator for Sri Lanka. Three factors. Number one, terrorism. The church attacks by the Islamic terrorists in Sri Lanka had feared among the foreign tourists. Number one. Second reason is what? COVID. So because of COVID, the tourism sector also fallen down. Third reason, the remittances which is coming out because of the tourism, that also reduced drastically. This tourism sector as well as primary commodity sector, these two sectors are responsible for reduction in the foreign exchange. So when the foreign reserves are reduced, obviously the country cannot sustain itself. For example, in India we have somewhere around $400 billion. If we come down to $4 billion, what happens? We will be not in a position to sustain our country in buying oil, in buying import goods. The same situation was been occurred in Sri Lanka. In the same way, the export of primary commodities include limited goods such as tea, rubber and garments also, like textile industry. The economy was on downturn spiral mainly because of global commodity prices was been down, exports slowed down, economic imports increased, the average GDP growth was been fallen down. Why? Because exports are reducing, imports are increasing, economy is coming down. So the GDP has been reducing, gross domestic product is reducing. Global financial crisis of 2008 as well as the economic downturn in 2013 has been pushed. It worsened the situation in Sri Lanka, accelerated with COVID situation. International economic factors. These are international economic factors. So what happened? The Sri Lanka went to International Monetary Fund. Please, we want money. Please, we want some loans. Why? Because our country is not in a position to sustain ourselves. Then IMF has been fixed some conditionalities. Like what? How in 1991, liberalization, privatization and globalization in the name called as new economic policy came into existence. How International Monetary Fund has been fixed some conditionality to Indian government in order to get the loans, in order to give the loans. In the same way, the IMF also fixed some conditionalities. Number one, physical deficit must be reduced to 3.5% from 5%. Number two, tax policy and tax administration should be rationalized. Why? Because some populist policies were being made in Sri Lanka. Like taxes were being reduced drastically. Populist policies in order to get votes from the people. But what will happen? The government, if the government doesn't get any revenue, then how the government can run the show? How the government can run the administration? So IMF told that, yes, I will be giving you the loans, but you have to rationalize the tax policies and tax administration. Number three, control of expenditure. Why? Because one particular family is ruling the Sri Lanka. So expenditures are very, very huge. We have to reduce the expenditure. The third conditionality. Fourth conditionality, commercialization of public expenditure. Public enterprises means public enterprises should work on profit making, like our BHEL, like our NTPC, like our ONGC, who are public enterprises who are running, like our public sector banks, which are public enterprises but which are running on profit motive. So you should also have profit motive. Flexibility in exchange rate, no rigid exchange rate. The exchange rate should be market driven. Improvement of competitiveness. The local companies, the domestic players were being dominant in Sri Lanka, and asked that please allow competition. When competition is there, the market will thrive. When the market thrives, the economy will grow. So encourage competitiveness, another conditionality. Another conditionality, free environment for foreign investments. So allow free foreign investment. There is a rigid policy which is followed in Sri Lanka. These are the reforms. Go for foreign investment, free foreign investment. These conditions were being asked by International Monetary Fund. See, suddenly the economy is not running, and I opened up the market. When I opened up the market, whether anyone will come and put their investment? No one. No. Why? Because already economy is not performing properly. So investments are not coming. Domestic economy is failed. It is been pushed. Last month, 22.5% of inflation. India somewhere around 5.5 we have, whereas 22.5% of inflation is present in the March month of 2022. The economy is collapsing. There is an economic emergency also announced by Sri Lankan government. So these are the reasons which are responsible for the economic crisis in Sri Lanka. Decline in tourism. 2019 we have bomb terrorist attacks on churches. Remittances reduced, tourism sector reduced, No economy. Why? Because the major economy of the Sri Lanka was being mainly based upon tourism. The tourism sector is also underperforming. Remittances are not coming. The foreign exchange is not, the foreign reserves are not increasing. This is another big factor. Tax cuts for populistic measures. These three gentlemen, these are the three people of Sri Lankan administration, for the sake of getting votes, for the populist measures. You know, they reduce tax like anything. If the government doesn't get the tax, how the government will run? How the show will run? The value added tax rates were reduced from 15% to 8%. Annual income threshold was being increased from 3 lakhs to 50, from 5 lakhs to 30 lakhs. Means till 30 lakhs there will be no tax. Till 30 lakhs of Sri Lankan rupee there will be no tax. Earlier it was 5 lakhs, no tax, but now they can earn up to 30 lakhs, but you will not have any tax. In India, 2.5 is enough. If you earn more than 2.5 lakhs, there will be some tax. The nation building tax, the payee tax, and the economic service charges. So the taxes were being reduced drastically in order to get the votes, in order to appease the people. But the government is not having the revenue now. Why? Because when you reduce the taxes for the sake of populistic measures, now what is happening in our elections? I will give this, I will give this, I will give this. If we continue this fringe benefits, one day our Indian economy also will collapse, like what happened to these populistic measures which happened in Sri Lanka. This is one best example. Don't go for irrational populistic measures like reducing tax. The big thing is, the very big thing is organic farming policy. On a sudden night, got a buyout, got up from the sleep, and he got an idea. Now onwards, no synthetic fertilizers. We will go only for organic fertilizer. And he told across the country, total ban on synthetic fertilizers, no synthetic fertilizers. We will be going only for organic farming. You know, organic farming, the output will be less. The agriculture production will be less. The yield will be less. So the farmers were being angry. But the reasoning is best. The reasoning is good. What is the reasoning? You know, actually, the tea, the rubber depend most on synthetic fertilizers. And not a 1% of fertilizer, artificial fertilizer is produced in Sri Lanka. So they completely depend upon foreign countries, imports. So in order to reduce the imports, by buying fertilizers, they came up with an innovative idea which is called as organic farming. That is good. But they didn't took proper measures, and the yield is less, the production is less, the farmer doesn't have the products, the farmer doesn't have the crops, and the farmers were been agitating. Again they reversed it. They reversed it and they cancelled the policy of organic farming policy. But by the time the disaster happened, the two crops completed without any yield. Sri Lanka annually spent about 0.3% of the GDP on just buying the fertilizer for the crops. So huge amount is going for buying fertilizers from the foreign countries by the name called as imports. They thought that they want to reverse it. So they banned synthetic fertilizers, imports. So they promoted organic fertilizers. As agriculture production fell, more imports of food became necessary. Already the primary products like paddy is very less, the food cultivation is very less, the food products are very less, and added to this organic farming. The total food production, the total food availability itself became less, and the inflation was been skyrocketing in Sri Lanka. So what are the reasons? Number one, IMF conditionality. Number two, organic farming policy. Number three, sudden reduction in tourism sector. Number four, populist measures like tax cutting. These are the major factors which are responsible for failure of economic systems in Sri Lanka. Sir, what is important for us, sir? The important is Sri Lanka's economic crisis affecting India. Sri Lanka's economic crisis impacting in India. How it is impacting India? Number one, we gave lot of loans to Sri Lanka. Concessional rates, the interest rates were very, very minimal. We gave it to Sri Lanka. But now Sri Lanka is not in a position to pay back. They are not in a position to sustain themselves. So whether we should keep any hope on the loans which we provided to the Sri Lanka? So we are going to lose the loans which we provided to the Sri Lankan government. Number 2, now there is a chance that Sri Lanka might intertwine. The Sri Lanka might occupy the space and the Sri Lanka might pump some money into Sri Lanka to lift the economic crisis, driven Sri Lanka into the economic growth. Then the Sri Lanka will have a loyalty towards the China. It will be threat to India. This is the second factor which is impacting. Third, we have investments. We have educational investments. We have railways. We have infrastructure investments in Sri Lanka. If Sri Lanka economic system collapse, our infrastructure which we invested also collapse. Foreign investment from India into Sri Lanka is very high. Tamilians investment is very high in Sri Lanka. Those investments will be lost. So these are some of the impacts which can happen on India if Sri Lanka further pushed into economic crisis. Neighborhood first policy towards Sri Lanka had resonated with Sri Lanka's India first foreign and security policy in 2020. It might impacted by China taking its position. Major investor in Sri Lanka is India. The investors might impact. Concessional financing which given to Sri Lanka might be impacted. Foreign direct investment into Sri Lanka is mostly by India. And the big thing, the China might enter into the gap. So this is the impact of economic crisis in Sri Lanka on India. So this is a summary of Sri Lankan economic crisis and its impact on India. Please subscribe to our channel. All the best and Jai Hind.